The chamber is open and full of whispers.
Before we dive in, check the link in the description if you want exclusive timelines, members-only videos you won't find on YouTube, all on our Patreon. The removal van pulled away from number 5 Privet Drive at 5:45 in the evening, and the street resumed being exactly what it had always been. A sequence of identical houses making identical arguments about respectability, each one so committed to the appearance of normalcy that the appearance had long since replaced the thing itself. The street lamps came on. Somewhere inside number 4, a baby was sleeping in a cot that had been placed on a doorstep 14 hours earlier like a milk delivery, and the woman who lived there had taken it inside without calling anyone. Because calling anyone would have required explaining, and explaining would have required admitting that the world contained things she had spent 20 years refusing to acknowledge. The door of number 5 opened. Remus John Lupin stepped onto the front step, and the first thing about him, the thing that established everything, was how he stood. Not the tentative lean of a man uncertain of his welcome, not the puffed stillness of a man performing authority. He simply stood, with the straight-backed precision of someone who has been given a post and has decided, in the full private knowledge of what it will cost him, to hold it. He was 21 years old. The gray at his temples had arrived early, accelerated by monthly transformations that left him hollowed out and reassembled in ways that the calendar could not quite track. His coat was charcoal and well cut, the first good coat he had owned in his adult life. Purchased 3 days ago from a shop in Bristol with money from a Gringotts key that he had spent one full night staring at before he could bring himself to use it. He looked across the road at number 4. He did not look away. Albus said he's loved. He said the wards will hold. He looked at the upstairs window where the glow of a nightlight showed faint and orange through the curtains. We'll see. The morning of his second day on the street, he met Vernon Dursley at the letterboxes. Vernon was large and very red and wore the expression of a man who had developed, over many years, a sophisticated system for categorizing everything he encountered into things that were normal and things that were not, and who experienced genuine distress when an object refused to sort cleanly. He extended a hand with the particular aggression of a man whose handshakes were a form of opening statement. "Dursley, number 4, Vernon said. "Lupin, number 5, Remus said. He shook the hand. "I'm a writer." This was true in the narrow sense. Vernon's grip tightened past the point of greeting into the territory of establishing something. Remus's grip did not tighten in return. It remained firm in the different way, the way of a man who is not performing his strength because the performance is unnecessary. Vernon's eyes moved across the coat, the posture, the complete absence of reaction to the pressure he was applying, and filed the result under odd but probably harmless. He would revise this assessment. The first covert visit to Harry came in the deep of winter, which was the hour Privet Drive was most reliably empty of the kind of attention that required management. Remus moved through the lily wards with no resistance. Dumbledore had coded his signature into the ward structure as benign, which was an unusual modification for wards of this type, and suggested that Dumbledore had been planning this longer than the 12-word conversation implied. Harry was 14 months old and healthy, which surprised Remus less than the quality of the infant's attention. The baby was awake in his cot, and had been awake, Remus could tell from the specific stillness, the absence of the restless motion of a child who has just woken, for some time. Lily's eyes tracked him from the doorway with a focus that seemed wrong for an infant, not precocious. Something quieter than precocious. Something that looked, in the candlelight from the nightlight on the shelf, like patience. Remus sat on the floor beside the cot. He did not pick the child up. He said, very quietly, "Your mum was the best person I've ever known. She was smarter than all 4 of us combined, and she never once let us forget it, which was correct of her, because we needed to be reminded," he said. He paused. "You're going to be extraordinary, Harry. I'm going to make sure of it." Harry looked at him. Harry did not respond. Because Harry was 14 months old and the architecture of language had not yet finished constructing itself in his mind. But the look he gave Remus was the look he would still be giving him 20 years later, the look of someone who is recording what you've said in a place it will not be lost. Remus stayed for 23 minutes. He left before the household woke. The ward work began in spring. Layer 2 first, the sentinel wards, requiring anchor points placed at precise intervals along the street's perimeter. He did this on evening walks, which were unremarkable in a neighborhood where several residents walked for their health. What they did not know was that the man from number 5 was dropping smooth, flat stones into garden borders at geometrically exact positions, each stone inscribed on its underside with a rune so small it required a magnifying glass to see. Each rune activated by a word spoken under his breath as the stone left his hand. The neighbors who found them assumed they were decorative. One woman used 3 of them to border her hydrangeas. Remus adjusted the ward geometry and did not mind. The adjustment was good practice. By autumn, the perimeter was complete. The sentinel wards did not prevent entry. They did not alarm. They logged. Anyone who crossed the perimeter boundary carrying dark magical intent received a tag that was invisible to the carrier and, to Remus in wolf form, as legible as a name written in fire. He began the Marauder misdirection field in winter. It was slower work. It required not the placement of anchors, but the establishment of a passive resonance that the street's existing magical substrate had to accept over time, the way a body accepts a graft. He understood the concealment principles better than anyone alive. Now that James was dead and Sirius, he understood the principles. He applied them outward instead of inward. The field did not hide the street. It whispered, at a frequency only hostile intent could receive. Wrong street. Nothing here. Move along. It took 4 months to set. By the following spring, the full architecture was in place. Privet Drive looked like Privet Drive. Underneath, it was something else entirely. He sourced the Wolfsbane through Damocles Belby's private practice, a favor owed through a mutual contact at St. Mungo's, secured through 3 letters and a level of professional persistence that Belby had described, not unkindly as remarkable. The potion was not widely available. The supply was irregular, and the cost was significant, and Remus considered both of these facts acceptable given the alternative. The moment that defined everything came on a summer afternoon when Harry was nearly 3. He had found a caterpillar in the back garden of number 4, and was engaged in what appeared to be a comprehensive scientific examination of it, crouched close, very still. With the concentrated attention he gave to things he had decided were worth understanding. The back door had been left open while Petunia managed Dudley inside. Nobody had noticed Harry wander out. Vernon came through the back gate from the street. He found a toddler in the garden where a toddler had no business being, and his voice lifted with the specific quality of anger that Remus had been cataloging for 18 months, not blind rage but directed irritation. The anger of a man who has decided that certain inconveniences can be physically redirected. He grabbed Harry's arm. The front gate opened. Remus came up the garden path with the unhurried movement of a man who is entirely certain the situation will arrange itself around him when he arrives. He was carrying a covered dish, a nominally neighborly visit, and he did not quicken his pace as he came, because quickening his pace would have communicated urgency, and urgency would have communicated that he needed Vernon Dursley to cooperate. He did not need Vernon Dursley to cooperate. He needed Vernon Dursley to understand. He stopped 4 feet from Vernon. The distance was precise. "Mr. Dursley, I happened to notice Harry had found his way outside." "I hope everything is all right," Remus said. His voice was perfectly pleasant. His eyes were doing what well-trained eyes do when every other muscle in the face is performing politeness. They were watching, cataloging, and remembering. Vernon released Harry's arm. "Fine, everything's fine," he said. "I'm glad," Remus said. He crossed to Harry, picked up the small boy, and carried him to Vernon. He added, still pleasantly I should mention, I work from home. I'm nearly always in. I find it one of the unexpected pleasures of writing. You develop very good observation skills. You notice things that most people miss. He smiled. Good afternoon, he said. Vernon Dursley stood in his garden after the gate closed and held his nephew and felt something he could not name. He was absolutely, completely certain, in a way that operated below the register of thought, that the man at number 5 knew something about him. Not suspected. Knew he did not grab Harry's arm again. Not that day. Not the one after. Not in all the years that followed. That night, Remus looked across at the glow of the nightlight on Harry's shelf. I've got you, Harry, he said quietly, to the window across the road. He picked up his tea. He went back to work. The public library on Magnolia Crescent smelled of carpet and old paper, and the specific institutional quiet of a building that had decided its purpose was the containment of noise rather than the generation of it. At 3:15 on a Tuesday afternoon it was almost entirely empty. A retired man doing a crossword near the periodicals, a mother with a sleeping infant in a pram, and in the back corner, near the history shelves, something that Remus felt before he saw it. The ward instrument in his coat pocket, a flat disc of carved obsidian, no larger than a watch face, calibrated to the specific frequency of uncontrolled accidental magic in untrained children, had been running warm since they turned onto Magnolia Crescent. He stopped walking. Harry walked into him. The magical signature that had erupted from the direction of the history shelves was unlike anything Remus had encountered in a professional context, which was considerable. He knew what accidental magic smelled like when it came from fear, from anger, from the ordinary low-level distress of a magical child in an environment that could not accommodate what they were. This was not that. This was the specific, unmistakable resonance of a mind that wanted something so completely that the wanting had become generative. Not crisis magic, not accident magic. Something rarer. The kind of resonance bloom that his research notes described in theory but flagged as almost never observed in the field, because it required a particular quality of hunger. The hunger for knowledge, operating at such intensity that it crossed the threshold between desire and transformation. Let's go to the library first, Remus said, very quietly, to Harry. Harry, who was 5 and had been promised ice cream and was recalibrating his understanding of the afternoon schedule, looked up at him. He read Remus's expression with the fluency he had been developing since before he had words for it. Is something wrong? He said. No, Remus said. Something interesting. She was in the back corner near the history shelves, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a book open across her knees, and her eyes moving across the page at a speed that was not technically possible for a 5-year-old. Her hair was extraordinary, dark brown, and operating entirely independently of whatever her mother had done to it that morning, expanding into the ambient air with the specific confidence of something that had made its own decisions about direction. She did not look up when they approached. She was on a page that required her complete attention, and she was giving it her complete attention, because she was not the kind of person who did things partially. On the shelf beside her, a book sat with a faint magical residue on its spine that only Remus could detect. The hold request slip attached to its cover was slightly scorched at the edges. Remus crouched to her level, which was the thing he always did when speaking to children, because it was the correct thing to do. Excuse me, I'm Miss Lupin. I'm a private tutor who works with exceptionally gifted children. I live on Privet Drive, just down the road, he said. She looked up. Her eyes were the specific brown of very strong tea, and they assessed him with the focused efficiency of someone who had already been disappointed by adults, who used the word gifted to mean something other than what she knew it meant, and who was deciding, in approximately 4 seconds, whether this one was different. She looked at Harry, who was looking at her with the complete, unhurried attention that Remus had spent years teaching him, the wolf patience of a creature that does not perform interest but simply has it. "You can sit down if you want." "But I'm reading," she said. Harry sat down across from her on the library floor without being asked twice. He did not say anything. He waited. This was the first and most important thing he showed her, that he knew how to wait. The meeting with Richard and Helen Granger happened on a Thursday evening at their house, which was organized in the way of people who had strong opinions about where things should be and the follow-through to implement those opinions consistently. Remus wore his most normal clothes, still the good coat, because he had decided that dressing well was a form of self-respect he was no longer going to apologize for, but without the formal robes he kept in the wardrobe at number 5. He did not use the word magical until the 4th minute of the conversation, which was when Richard Granger set down his tea and said, very precisely, "Mr. Lupin, we have been waiting for someone to use that word for approximately 3 years. Please continue." He continued. He told them everything in the order that made it most comprehensible, what Hermione was, what Hogwarts was, what the world she would be entering at 11 looked like, from the outside and from the inside. He was honest about the social architecture, because the Grangers were people who processed honesty better than reassurance. Helen Granger had a notepad. She made notes throughout. By the time Remus reached the ward provision and the legal protection framework, she had filled 3 pages. Richard Granger asked 2 questions. The first was whether Hermione would be safe. The second was whether she would be treated as what she actually was, rather than what the system expected her to be. Remus answered both honestly. Safe was a relative term in a world that contained what it contained. As for the second question, that was precisely why the arrangement existed. Because the default outcome for a girl like Hermione, without preparation and without standing, was a world that would spend 7 years underestimating her, and then spend the next 30 years in a complicated relationship with having been wrong. "We'd like to meet Harry," Helen said. Harry was summoned from the kitchen, where he had been eating biscuits and explaining, in considerable detail, the precise morphological differences between a common garden lizard and a sand lizard, which he considered an important distinction that most people were not sufficiently aware of. He came in, stood in the living room doorway, and looked at the Grangers with his careful eyes. Helen Granger said later that what convinced her was not the letter or the legal framework, or even Remus's particular quality of unhurried honesty. It was the way Harry looked at Hermione, across the sitting room, through the kitchen doorway, the look of a 5-year-old who had been waiting for someone specifically and was quietly, completely relieved that she had turned up. "We trust her," Richard said. What he meant was, we trust the judgment of a child who has been recognizing important things since before she had words for them. And she recognized this. "When can we begin?" Helen said. The first real lesson was a Saturday morning in autumn, at the table in Remus's library at number 5. The room smelled of old books and beeswax, and the faint mineral trace of ward work that had been active for long enough to become part of the building's smell. Remus had cleared the table of his observation logs and his ward diagrams, and had set one object in the center, a single white candle in a plain holder. Both children sat across from him, 2 sets of eyes watching him with the particular quality of children who have decided that this is worth their complete attention. Magic is not something you do. It is something you are. It is the language your body speaks when your mind and heart agree about something completely, Remus said. He looked at the candle. "Today we're going to find out what that feels like. I want you each to think about something you want to protect." Harry thought about Hermione. She was sitting next to him, and she had been sitting next to him for 3 weeks, and in those 3 weeks she had become the first person his age who talked to him like what he said was worth listening to. He thought about her and looked at the candle, and nothing happened. Hermione thought about libraries. Not this one specifically, all of them. Every library she had ever been in, and every library she hadn't found yet, which was a number too large to calculate and therefore even more important. Every book she had read, and the specific joy of the first page of a book she hadn't read yet, which was a different kind of joy. The joy of a door about to open. She thought about all of it with the total commitment of someone for whom thought itself was a physical act. The candle flame doubled in height. Harry looked at the candle. He looked at Hermione, who was looking at the flame with an expression he didn't have a word for yet, but would later identify as the look she wore when something was exactly what she needed it to be. He felt the same thing he felt when he had found Remus's resonance anchor in the rhododendron. The sense of something that was supposed to be somewhere finally being where it was supposed to be. The candle flame doubled again. Remus sat very still in his chair behind the table. There was an expression on his face that had been absent from it for years. The specific expression of a man who has been holding something at a careful distance, because the distance was necessary and is now failing, in one autumn morning in a book-smelling room to maintain the required gap. He let it happen for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "All right, let's begin." The back garden of number 5 at 11 o'clock on a winter night. Their breath came in small directed clouds. The grass was hard underfoot. The stars above the garden were very clear. Harry and Hermione were blindfolded. Remus had placed 12 objects at various points around the garden before they came outside. Some magical, some not, distributed in a pattern that was neither random nor obvious. The task was to identify, without moving, which ones were magical and which were not. Don't look for them. Feel the field. The magical objects are producing something. Find the something, he said. Harry went still in the specific way he went still when he was doing it correctly. Not the stillness of someone suppressing movement, but the stillness of someone who has relocated their attention entirely inward. He stood in the cold garden with his blindfold on for 40 seconds. Then he pointed. The rose bush. The ceramic pot near the back wall. The flat stone by the garden tap. The hollow space under the 3rd fence post. 7 objects in 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Hermione took a different approach. She was quiet for 90 seconds, then began to speak under her breath, not casting, thinking aloud in the compressed way she used when she was working through a structure rather than waiting for an instinct. The distribution isn't random. He never uses purely random distributions because he says real threats are never random. So if I've identified 3 points that form a rough triangle, then the remaining objects are probably maintaining some geometric relationship too, she pointed. 5 objects independently, then reasoned her way to the 2 that Harry's instinct had found first, arriving at all 12 through a completely different route. Remus removed their blindfolds, all 12 in 4 minutes and 30 seconds. 3 minutes faster than last week, he said. He did not say well done. He said, what did you both do differently? This was the non-negotiable element. The debrief was part of the lesson. The lesson did not end when the task was completed. The lesson ended when they understood what the task had shown them. They both wrote it down. The occlumency sessions happened on Tuesday mornings in Remus's study, the room with the best chairs and the worst view, a fence in the back of the house on the adjacent street, chosen specifically because rooms with interesting views were rooms where the mind went elsewhere. Harry sat across the table with his hands flat on the surface. Ready? Remus said. Yes, Harry said. Remus extended his awareness, barely more than attention. He touched the surface of Harry's mind and found a house. Not a metaphor that approximated a house, an actual architectural construct, with the specificity of a child who had been told to build something and had built it with complete commitment. A foyer. Labeled doors in Harry's careful handwriting. He touched the door labeled Private, Memories of Mum. The door had a lock. And attached to the lock, running through it like a current through a wire, was a specific emotional note that Harry had chosen to associate with it. Not aggression, not fear, a very clear, very simple version of, not yours. Remus withdrew immediately. Good, very good, he said. I could feel you, Harry said. You should be able to. Knowing when someone is in your mind is as important as keeping them out. Today you did both, Remus said. Hermione said, without looking up from the diagram she was annotating, I think mine needs more rooms. I keep putting things in the wrong ones and I have to reorganize. That's not a problem, Remus said. That's a process. The house improves as you improve. The reorganization is the work. Hermione wrote this down and underlined it twice. There was a woman operating 3 streets over who sold protection charms from a front room she advertised on index cards in the newsagent's window. She was not a witch. The charms were largely inert. 94% harmless. The remaining 6% had a quality that Harry identified at a distance of 3 streets on a Sunday afternoon while walking back from the corner shop. He stopped. He stood on the pavement and extended the ambient awareness that Remus had been drilling into him for 2 years. He mapped the signature, location, intensity, directionality, and assessed the specific quality of the 6% that was not inert, something with an emotional manipulation component, thin and probably unintentional but present. He went home. He wrote the report. 4 paragraphs. Location, intensity, estimated source and probable mechanism. Risk assessment. Remus read it twice. This is a solid risk assessment, he said. The emotional manipulation note is something most trained Aurors would miss because they're looking for deliberate casting signatures, and this doesn't have one. File it. We'll discuss it in the tactical session, Remus said. Harry filed it. Volume 2 of the Adversarial Survey, which was Hermione's organizational system and therefore comprehensive, cross-referenced, and annotated in 2 colors, acquired a new section, Passive Ambient Threat Indicators. The incident, so named because the ceramic hedgehog in the garden at number 41, turned out to be where the woman 3 streets over had anchored the primary activation, became the first entry. The Dudley Dursley incident happened on a Tuesday in October, and Hermione had been carrying her first notebook for 6 days. Dudley had assembled his standard operational unit, 4 boys, all larger than average for their age, all operating on the combined social logic of a group that has identified a target and has not yet encountered meaningful resistance. The target was Hermione, who was new to the neighborhood in the practical sense and had not yet learned, by Dudley's assessment, that certain streets had established hierarchies. Harry placed himself between Dudley and Hermione with a movement so unhurried it barely registered as deliberate. He did not raise his hands. He did not speak. He simply stood there and looked at Dudley with the patient, specific attention of someone who is gathering information rather than preparing a response. The wolf stillness that Remus had been drilling into him since he was old enough to hold still. The quality of a creature that does not move unnecessarily and does not telegraph, and is simply, completely present. Dudley's forward momentum slowed. Then, stopped. He could not have articulated why. His animal instincts were not sophisticated, but they were functional, and they were telling him with some urgency that the variable in front of him had changed in a way that his existing model did not account for. From behind Harry, in a voice that carried the precise distance required, and no further, Hermione said, I know your name, Dudley Dursley. I know where you live. I know your father's name and your mother's name, and I have a very good memory. She said it the way she said everything, with the flat, particular confidence of someone stating a fact that does not require emphasis, because facts do not require emphasis. Dudley retreated. His unit followed, in the way that units follow when the person at the front has decided the engagement is over. Harry exhaled. Hermione came to stand beside him and took his hand, not in a frightened way, in the way of someone confirming a location. He could feel that her hand was completely steady. Was that magic? She said. Harry considered it honestly. I don't know. Maybe. Remus says magic and nerve are the same thing sometimes, he said. We should document this, Hermione said. She already had the notebook. She had been carrying it for 6 days. She opened it to the first page, which was headed, in her careful handwriting, Adversarial Biological Survey. Volume 1, H. Granger. The first entry read, Subject, Dudley Dursley. Method, Presence and Information Asymmetry. Result, Retreat without escalation. Conclusion, Credible threat does not require demonstration. Note, cross-reference with Remus's lesson on the distinction between performing strength and having it. You spelled asymmetry correctly, Harry said. Of course I did, Hermione said. They walked back to number 5 for their afternoon session. Through the study window, Remus watched them come up the path, the boy and the girl, side by side, the notebook already open again. And he wrote one line in his observation log before they reached the door. The Magnolia Crescent Pact is complete. The pack is 3. On full moon nights, Remus ran the perimeter of Privet Drive in wolf form. The specific quality of movement, not a dog's movement, not a man's, but the third thing, the ancient thing, covered the street in the silent patrol that had become as regular as a tide. He passed number 4. Through the upstairs window, in Harry's room, the light was on. Harry appeared at the window. He was 10 years old, and he had known since he was very small what the presence in the street on full moon nights was, and he was not afraid of it. He raised a hand. The wolf paused in the street below. It inclined its great head, once, with the dignity of something that has been many things, and has made its peace with all of them. Then it moved on, continuing its patient circuit, watched over by something the magical world had categorized as a dangerous being, and which was, in every way that the categorization failed to account for, simply a guardian doing its work. On an afternoon in the spring before Hogwarts, Vernon placed himself in the doorway of number 4, with the manner of a man who believed that physical occupation of a threshold was a legally binding position. Harry was 10 and a half, and had not been afraid of his uncle for several years. "I'll tell Mr. Lupin you'd like a word," he said. The knocker on the front door of number 5 sounded. Remus Lupin was on the doorstep with his hands in his coat pockets and the expression of a man who happened to be passing. "Vernon, how are you?" he said. He said it with the pleasant, untroubled warmth of a man who has all the time in the world and a very complete filing cabinet of his own. The momentum Vernon had been building dispersed. Something in the accumulated weight of years, the garden incident, the times he had felt the neighbor's eyes on the street with the quality of attention that knew things, the notarized document in the filing cabinet that Vernon had never voluntarily touched, but whose existence he was aware of every time he opened the drawer, something settled over him like a change in pressure. He stepped back from the door. Harry walked past him to join Remus on the front path. "I've adjusted Harry's schedule. Mornings are entirely free for you. I know Petunia appreciates a hand in the garden." "Afternoons are mine, if that works," Remus said, pleasantly, to Vernon. It was not a question. Vernon said in the voice of a man negotiating in a language he didn't speak, "Fine." "Lovely, thank you, Vernon," Remus said. They walked across the road. "You didn't do anything," Harry said, after a moment. "No," Remus said. "He just let us go. A man who believes you know something about him will always negotiate rather than escalate. He doesn't know what I know. He simply knows that I know something. That's usually sufficient," Remus said. He glanced at Harry. "File it. We'll discuss it in the tactical session." Harry filed it. Later in the session, he wrote in the margin of his notes, "Information, or the credible appearance of information, is almost always more powerful than force. The threat does not need to be stated, it only needs to be understood." He read it back to himself and then wrote underneath, "Remus has been doing this since he arrived on this street." He showed it to Hermione. She read it. She added it to the survey under a new heading, Leverage mechanics. The Hogwarts letters arrived on a Thursday morning in summer, 40 minutes apart. Harry's came first, carried by a tawny owl that landed on the kitchen windowsill of number 5, with the particular authority of a bird that has delivered important things before and knows it. Remus was at the stove. Harry was at the table reading a monograph on ward anchor placement that was technically restricted to third-year students, and which Remus had obtained through Dumbledore's library access on the grounds that Harry needed the theory before he could properly understand what the streets, ward architecture was doing. Harry looked at the letter. He looked at the seal. He set down the monograph. "It's here," he said. "I know," Remus said. He did not turn from the stove immediately, because the eggs required another 30 seconds, and because the letter had been expected, and there was no urgency, only arrival. "Open it," he said. Harry opened it with the careful precision he applied to things that deserved careful precision. He read it once, completely, before saying anything. Then he set it on the table and looked at it. Hermione's letter arrived 40 minutes later via a barn owl that she later described as having arrived with considerably more drama than the occasion required, scattering the Grangers' breakfast table and leaving a wing mark in the marmalade. She was at number 5 within 7 minutes, still holding the envelope, slightly out of breath, with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a thing and is now recalibrating to its actual presence. She came through the kitchen door and stopped. Harry was at the table with his letter open in front of him. He looked at her. She looked at him. They grabbed each other's arms at the same moment. Remus turned from the stove. He looked at 2 11-year-olds who had been building toward this morning for 6 years, and who were now sitting in his kitchen with Hogwarts letters on the table between them, and the expression on his face was the one he did not often allow. The real one, without the careful management that was his default mode in a world that had given him consistent reasons to manage carefully. "You've been ready for 2 years. Now they get to find out," he said. Diagon Alley on a Saturday in August was a problem of scale. Remus had prepared them for the culture shock in the methodical way he prepared them for everything, briefings on the social architecture. The blood status hierarchy, the specific way power organized itself in the wizarding world. He had not been able to fully prepare them for the ambient magical field, which was extraordinary. Hundreds of magical signatures overlapping and interfering with each other in the specific cacophony of a small city's worth of wizarding commerce compressed into a single street. Hermione was overwhelmed in the precise way she was overwhelmed by things that excited her rather than frightened her. Her notebook already open, annotating discrepancies between Hogwarts, a history, and the observed reality of Flourish and Blotz's window display in real time. Harry performed the Marauder Awareness Protocol on Diagon Alley. It took 4.5 minutes. He folded the results on a piece of parchment and passed it to Hermione, who reviewed it without stopping walking. 3 people watching us that shouldn't be. North side. One is press, camera under his robes. The weight distribution is wrong. The other 2 I don't know, he said, quietly, to Remus. Remus, without looking up from the book he was examining in a shop window, "One of them is Dumbledore's. The other left before you finished your assessment. You moved too confidently." He expected a nervous child. Harry made a note on the parchment. Hermione made a note on hers. They synthesized without discussing it, which was the result of 6 years of operating as a unit. The synthesis happened at a level below the need for conversation. At Ollivander's, the session lasted 45 minutes. Harry's wand, Holly, 11 inches, Phoenix Feather, reacted with the explosive golden light that Ollivander's expression suggested he had been expecting and preparing himself for. He examined it for a long time, then set it down and looked at Harry with the look of a man organizing something he would not say aloud. Hermione's wand, Vine Wood, 10 3/4 inches, Dragon Heartstring, reacted with a pulse of white silver light that Ollivander held very still for. The light was quiet and very dense, the light of something operating at depth rather than surface. He looked at it, then at Hermione, then at the wall of his shop as if consulting something written there that no one else could see. He looked at Remus. "You trained them," he said. "A bit," Remus said. "How old are they?" Ollivander said, very quietly. 11. Ollivander wrote something in his record book that he turned slightly away from them to write. He looked at the wands for a long moment, then at the window. "Interesting times," he said, in the specific tone of a man for whom interesting was not a casual word. Platform 9 3/4 was steam and noise and the organized chaos of families in the final minutes of a departure. Remus moved through it with the same steady attention he moved through everything. One hand briefly on Harry's shoulder as they came through the barrier, the touch and release of someone who has calibrated exactly what is needed. He shook Harry's hand. Their standard greeting, the handshake of two people who had agreed, years ago, that dignity was a form of love. He hugged Hermione, who had not practiced not crying and did not manage it, but kept it to 5 seconds, which was a form of self-discipline that he recognized and respected. He said the same thing to both of them. "You know everything you need to know. Remember who you are. Write to me if anything is genuinely urgent. Everything is going to be fine." He meant, the pack does not stop because of distance. I am across the street. I am always across the street. The train pulled away at 11 o'clock. Remus stood on the platform until the steam cleared, then stood there a moment longer, because the moment longer was part of it. Then he went home to a house that was very quiet and a cold cup of tea on the kitchen table next to 2 Hogwarts letters. He picked up his observation log. He wrote, both, on the train. Trust the work. He made himself a fresh cup of tea. He went back to work. McGonagall's first transfiguration class. She transformed her desk into a pig, standard demonstration, performed with the brisk efficiency of someone who has done it 400 times. She asked for volunteers. Neither Harry nor Hermione raised their hands. They simply performed the reverse transformations simultaneously, without wands touching their desks, without spoken incantation. McGonagall did not speak for 4 seconds. The class counted them. "Please see me after class," she said, in a voice that had removed all expression from itself, in the specific way of someone who requires privacy to process something. The sorting began at 7:47, and the first unusual thing was Hermione Granger. She sat under the sorting hat for 2 minutes and 20 seconds, which McGonagall's expression indicated was significantly beyond the standard range. The hat appeared to be conducting a thorough examination rather than a categorization. Hermione sat with her hands folded in her lap and the focused stillness of someone who has been asked a substantive question and is giving it a substantive answer. When it announced Gryffindor, she walked to the table with the expression of someone whose independent conclusion has been formally confirmed. The second unusual thing was Harry Potter. McGonagall called his name, and the Great Hall produced the reaction it always produced for that name, a shift in attention, a collective intake, the specific quality of a room full of people who have been told a story and are now encountering a character from it. Harry walked to the stool with the even pace of someone who has walked toward significant things for long enough that the walk itself no longer requires management. The hat descended. In the Great Hall, 30 seconds passed. Then, a minute. McGonagall was standing very still. 2 minutes. At the staff table, Severus Snape had not moved in 90 seconds. Dumbledore had set down his goblet. Inside, the following exchange was occurring. The hat encountered the foyer first. The organized foyer, with its labeled doors and its coat rack and its welcome mat, presenting exactly what Harry had chosen to present. The hat had been sorting students for 1,000 years. It had never been received by a prepared room. "These defenses. Are you aware you're occluding me?" it said. "I'm not. Actually, this is just how my mind is. I can let you look, but I'd like to know what you're looking at first," Harry said. "You want to negotiate. Remus says you should always establish ground rules before sharing information. Your guardian is a werewolf. Yes, he's also the best person I know. The hat took stock. It found the loyalty that belonged to Hufflepuff, and the intelligence that belonged to Ravenclaw, and the ambition that belonged to Slytherin, and the courage that belonged to Gryffindor, and it found that none of them were separate. They were the same thing, organized differently depending on what the moment required. There are no categories for what you are, the hat said. So where do I go? Where do you want to go? Where Hermione is. The hat considered this for one full second. Then it said, quietly, something that 3 people at the staff table would later report hearing before the formal announcement. Extraordinary. And then, aloud, Gryffindor. Harry walked to his seat beside Hermione with the composure of someone who has been preparing for a room for 10 years and finds it. On arrival, exactly as expected. The ward structure has at least 15 layers I can already distinguish, Hermione said, without looking up from the castle map she had begun constructing from memory. Remus estimated 12, Harry said. I know. He's going to be annoyed, she said. At the staff table, Dumbledore picked up his goblet, and something in his expression settled into the particular quality of a man who has made a long bet and is watching it resolve correctly. Harry identified the problem at the welcome feast. He was performing the Marauder Awareness Protocol on the staff table, a reflex by this point, as automatic as checking exits, as habitual as breath, when he reached Professor Quirinus Quirrell and stopped. The ambient magical field around Quirrell had a quality he had encountered once before. He had been 9 years old, reading in Remus's study on a wet Tuesday afternoon, when Remus had handed him a monograph and said, "This chapter. Read it carefully. This is the kind of thing you need to know exists before you encounter it, because encountering it without the framework is the kind of mistake you don't get to make twice." The chapter was titled Dark Parasitic Magic, Possession, Cohabitation, and Soul Anchoring in Living Hosts. It described, in its 3rd section, what a trained magical observer could detect in the vicinity of a possessed individual. The description used the phrase doubled signature, the sense that a magical being carried 2 distinct presences in one body, one dominant and one suppressed, the way 2 voices talking simultaneously produced a sound that was neither voice but contained both. Quirrell had a doubled signature. The suppressed one was ancient, cold, and radiated at a frequency that Harry's ambient awareness registered as something that had been kept alive by methods it was never designed to survive. It was not the signature of a living thing, it was the signature of something that had refused to stop. Harry reached under the table, tore a corner from his parchment, and wrote one word. He folded it and passed it to Hermione without looking at her. She opened it. She read it. She looked at the staff table with the careful peripheral attention they had both learned to use. Never direct, never fixed. The look that gathered information without communicating that it was gathering. She wrote one word beneath his and passed it back. His word was wrong. Hers was confirmed. The humiliation came in the 3rd week of term, in the middle of a data lesson on counter curses. Quirrell stated that Protego could not deflect a Diffindo variant at angles greater than 45 degrees. Harry waited for him to finish. The deflection angle depends on the caster's anchor point, not the spell's trajectory. At 60 degrees, you adjust the anchor 2 inches left. The geometry changes, the deflection doesn't fail, he said. He said it the way he said corrections, not unkindly, simply accurately, in the voice of someone who has been doing this since he was 7. Quirrell could not respond. The class watched him not respond. The investigation took 3 weeks. They did not follow Quirrell dramatically through corridors. They observed, documented, and cross-referenced. Harry tracked his movement patterns. Hermione went to the library. By the end of week 2, she had 14 pages of notes and a conclusion she had written and rewritten 3 times because she wanted the phrasing exact. The suppressed signature is consistent with a soul fragment of extraordinary age, anchored to a living host through a method the texts call soul splicing. The fragment is using Quirrell's body as a temporary vessel, she said on a Sunday evening in the library. Voldemort, Harry said. Almost certainly. He's not fully present. But he's here. Remus's letter. I know. The letter had arrived in the 2nd week of September. The Quirrell appointment concerned me when it was announced. Keep an eye on him. Don't approach. Document. Tell me what you find. He had known. He had sent them in with the framework and the instinct and the monograph they'd read at 9 and trusted them to do the rest. The 3rd floor corridor. Dumbledore's announcement at the feast wasn't a warning. It was an inventory. The object is almost certainly the Philosopher's Stone. The vault robbery at Gringotts in July. The prophet reported the vault had been emptied earlier the same day. Dumbledore moved it here before Quirrell could reach it at Gringotts, Hermione said. We need to tell Dumbledore. I know. I've been drafting the report, she said. The troll on Halloween did not find them in the girls' bathroom. They were in the library finishing the evidence report. Harry had registered the change in Quirrell's movement pattern 3 hours before the announcement. The specific urgency of someone who has decided that a distraction is necessary tonight. And they had gone to the library because the report was what mattered. The troll was a distraction. They did not walk into distractions. Hermione made a note. Troll confirmed distraction event. Harry added beneath it, when someone creates noise, find out what they're trying to do while you're listening to it. The meeting with Dumbledore was requested through McGonagall on a Monday morning. The headmaster is a very busy man, McGonagall said. I understand. We have information that affects the school's security. We'll keep it brief, Harry said. McGonagall looked at him for a moment. 7 o'clock tomorrow evening, she said. Dumbledore's office at 7 o'clock. The silver instruments on their shelves conducting their small, precise movements. Fawkes on his perch. Harry set the report on the desk without ceremony. Professor Quirrell is possessed by a soul fragment of Lord Voldemort. He's here for the Philosopher's Stone, which is being kept in the 3rd floor corridor past the trapdoor. We've identified his access schedule and have mapped the security architecture using ambient magical analysis. We have 3 containment recommendations, sorted by collateral risk, he said. Dumbledore looked at the report. He looked at Harry, at Lily's eyes and a face shaped by 10 years of a werewolf's patient precision, and something moved in the old man's expression. He picked up the report. He read it twice. The 3rd containment scenario, the one that uses the Mirror of Erist as a secondary trap, Dumbledore said. Eventually, yes, sir, Harry said. I conceived of that independently. Approximately 3 weeks before term began. We know. The magical signature on the mirror's positioning enchantment is yours. We recognized it from the ward work on Privet Drive, Hermione said. Dumbledore set the report down. You've given me less than a minute's worth of new information. And 3 plans I hadn't considered, he said. He looked toward the window, toward the edge of the school's wards, in the general direction of Surrey. He's right to train you this way. He usually is. He said this last part very quietly, with the specific quality of a statement being made to himself rather than to the room. Quirrell left Hogwarts within the week. The stone was secured by a revised protection arrangement that incorporated 2 of Hermione's suggested improvements. The Weasley twins sent a package with a note. This belonged to some friends of ours. Prongs, Moony, Padfoot, Wormtail. We think it knows where it's supposed to be. Harry unwrapped it in the dormitory with Hermione beside him. Inside was a folded piece of parchment that appeared blank. He held it. I solemnly swear that I am up to no good, he said, in a voice that was completely level in the way that required effort to produce. The Marauder's map appeared. Harry looked at it for a long time. The ink lines, the labeled corridors, the moving dots of everyone in the castle. His father's handwriting in the corners, the handwriting that was unmistakably the same hand that had written notes in the margins of a defense against the dark arts textbook that Remus kept in a locked drawer in his study and never discussed. "Dad," he said, very quietly. Hermione took his hand. She did not say anything. She simply held it, with the steadiness of someone who knows that some moments require presence rather than words. The map lay open between them. Outside the dormitory window, the morning was cold and gray and entirely ordinary. The meeting happened in Dumbledore's office on a Thursday morning in Year 2, Remus in one chair, Snape in the other. The specific triangle of the room's arrangement making eye contact between them technically optional and deliberate effort to avoid it painfully obvious. The portraits were pretending to sleep. They were not very convincing about it. Snape had arrived first, which was the move of a man who had decided that controlling the room's geography was important. Remus acknowledged this without commenting on it, and took the remaining chair with the same ease he took all chairs, like a man who is not anxious about where he sits because he understands that the chair is not where the actual territory is. "You trained them specifically to resist legilimency," Snape said. He said it to Remus, not to the room. The directness of it was not rudeness, it was the move of someone who has been holding a specific charge, and has decided that the formal structure of the meeting is less important than establishing the charge clearly. "I trained them to protect their minds from intrusion of any kind. The application to legilimency is a consequence of the training, not its specific purpose," Remus said. Convenient, accurate, the distinction matters. Snape's jaw moved in the small way it moved when he was translating something through several filters, before allowing it to become speech. The Potter boys' mental architecture is organized, not suppressed, not walled. Organized, which is a specific choice made by a specific teacher. And I know exactly one person who teaches occlumency as architecture rather than as fortification. "That's correct," Remus said. "The Granger girls is worse." He said worse in the precise way of a man for whom worse meant something different than it appeared to. Her cross-referencing system has categories I would not have thought to create. One of them is labeled, and I am stating this exactly, Snape, S, Professional Conduct, Documented Instances. "She's thorough," Remus said. "She's 12. Yes, that's been true since September, and it hasn't become less true in the intervening months. I'm not sure what you'd like me to do with it." Dumbledore poured tea. Neither of the other two reached for their cup. "They approach my classroom as if it's an intelligence operation," Snape said. "Eventually, the Granger girl has identified 2 instances in which I marked her work at a lower standard than equivalent work from a Slytherin student." "Were her assessments accurate?" Remus said. The pause was short. "That's not the point. It's rather the point." Snape's expression did something controlled and precise. "You let them behave with impunity, I let James and Sirius behave with impunity," Remus said. He said it quietly, not with force, not with apology, with the flatness of something that has been thought about for a very long time and has arrived at the form of a statement rather than an argument. The room went still. "I know what I did," Remus said. "I know the specific nature of what I did and did not do in those 7 years. I know what it cost you. I'm not asking you to forgive it. I'm telling you that Harry is not James, and what I'm doing now is deliberately different from what I did then, because I made a decision that I was not going to repeat the failure of looking away when I should have spoken. Every instance of documented professional misconduct in your classroom over the past 2 months has been recorded and filed with the Hogwarts Board of Governors," Remus said. 9 instances in 7 weeks. The board has direct oversight authority over Hogwarts staff conduct. As Harry's registered guardian, I have standing to file. Snape went very still. The board could affect his employment in ways that mattered, not as a threat, as a record. Because I spent 7 years failing to keep one, and I've spent the past decade correcting that habit. After a silence that lasted long enough to change the quality of the room, Snape said, "What do you want?" A professional standard applied to Harry and Hermione equivalent to what you apply to every other student. Not favorable treatment. Equivalent treatment, Remus said. Snape was quiet for a long moment. "The Granger girl," he said. "Hermione, she corrects my annotations in her personal copy, crosses out where she thinks I'm wrong and writes her own reasoning." "Is she right?" Remus said. Another short pause. "Often," Snape said, with the specific difficulty of a man speaking a word that costs him something. "She reminds you of someone," Remus said. It was not a question. Snape's expression did something very small and very controlled. "She reminds me of two people, both of whom I lost." "I know," Remus said. He said it very gently. Lily would be appalled by this. The waste of it. Snape said nothing. What he did not say was its own kind of answer. In the corridor outside, Hermione had been sitting on the floor with volume 30 of the survey open across her knees. When Remus came out, she looked up. She did not ask how it went. She nodded once, the specific nod of someone whose documentation has just been confirmed as load-bearing. She closed the survey. "Professional standard," Remus said. Another silence, the longest one. "Professional standard," Snape said. Dumbledore poured 3 more cups of tea. This time, both of the other cups were reached for. Harry heard the voice in the pipes on the 4th day of October of that same year. He was walking back from the library at 9:30, taking the longer route along the second-floor corridor, when something at the edge of his ambient awareness resolved from background noise into language. He stopped walking. The sound was coming from below the floor, from inside the castle's pipe system, moving through the walls with the slow deliberateness of something very large navigating a space that it knew by long familiarity. It was not the sound of water. It was not the sound of any creature he had encountered in 3 years of Remus's dark bestiary curriculum. It was language, spoken in the same instinctive register through which Harry had always understood the speech of serpents, a gift whose origin he had only recently begun to understand. A fragment of something else lodged behind his scar. He stood in the corridor for 30 seconds, parsing what he could. Then he went to find Hermione. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she opened Volume 2 of the Adversarial Biological Survey and turned to the chapter labeled Giant Serpents, Taxonomy, Behavioral Profile, and Known Magical Variants. She turned to page 4. Basilisk. The king serpent. "There's a basilisk in the school," she said. "Yes," Harry said. She wrote at the top of a fresh page, "Basilisk, confirmed presence. Initial detection, H. Potter, Ambient Awareness Protocol." She noted the time, the location of the detection, the specific qualities of the voice Harry described. "I need a week. Don't do anything until I've built the framework," she said. "Obviously," Harry said. The letter to Remus went out the next morning. His reply arrived by Wednesday. "I had concerns about the Chamber of Secrets as a possibility when the school announced the new term. I'm sending diagrams of the known pipe system access points from the original architectural survey. Sirius obtained these from the Black family's records. Do not look at it directly under any circumstances. You know the basilisk protocols from the survey. The primary risk is the gaze. Reflective surfaces only. Update me daily. Do not approach alone. Do not approach without mirrors." He had included the relevant chapter from a monograph on giant serpents, annotated in the margins in his specific handwriting. Beside a paragraph on basilisk intelligence and longevity, the annotation read, "Important. Not a creature. A consciousness. Treat accordingly." Harry read the last annotation 3 times. The detection network took 2 weeks to establish. Hermione's design, built from the Marauder Awareness Protocol's core principles and adapted for a non-human magical signature. 7 rune inscription points across the school, from Remus's private collection, fading within a month. No permanent alteration to the castle's structure. By week 3, they had a movement map. The basilisk traveled through the pipe system on a weekly schedule with the regularity of something that had been doing the same circuit for centuries. The schedule correlated, Harry identified this on the 3rd week's data, with the behavioral pattern of Ginny Weasley. He had been watching Ginny since September, not because he suspected her of anything, because Remus had taught him that the Marauder Awareness Protocol was an ongoing practice, a continuous low-level monitoring of the emotional registers of the people around you. And Ginny Weasley's emotional register had been changing in a way that the survey's section on possession artifacts described with specific precision depletion of baseline affect. Increasing intervals of unaccounted for time, the physical changes associated with magical energy being drawn from a host. She has something. Something is using her to direct the basilisk, Hermione said. The diary, Harry said. He had seen it twice, in her bag at breakfast, on her desk in the library before she closed the bag quickly. Black leather, old, the specific quality of an object that radiated at the wrong frequency, the dark anchor signature that was to Harry's ambient awareness what a sour note was to a tuned ear. We talked to her, Hermione said. Ginny Weasley, in an empty classroom on a Thursday afternoon, arrived expecting something she was not sure she could survive knowing. What she found was Harry and Hermione sitting across from each other with a gap between them clearly intended for her, and 2 expressions that contained something she had not expected, not accusation, not suspicion, but the specific quality of people who have already done the calculation and have come not to examine her, but to help. There's something in your bag. Something that's been taken from you, Harry said. I'm not asking you to explain it. I'm telling you what I've observed. And I'm telling you that we know what it is and we know how to remove it, and after we do, you're going to be fine. It's not your fault. Whatever it showed you while you wrote in it, that was the artifact manipulating you. You couldn't have known, Hermione said. Ginny reached into her bag with shaking hands and produced a diary. Black leather cover, blank on the outside, faintly warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Hermione produced a lead-lined box from her own bag, prepared 3 days ago on the reasonable assumption that improvising containment on the spot was not how she preferred to do things. She took the diary without touching its cover directly and sealed it in the box. Ginny started crying. Not dramatically, the quiet, exhausted crying of someone who has been frightened for a very long time and has just been given permission to stop. Hermione sat beside her. Harry stood by the door and gave them space. They sent the lead-lined box to Remus that evening. His reply arrived 18 hours later, the handwriting slightly unsteady. It read, "This is a Horcrux. I will be there by Thursday. Tell Dumbledore, do not open the box. Before Thursday. Before Remus. Before the formal operation." Harry went to the corridor alone. Not to fight, not to enter. He crouched with his back against the wall outside the girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor, his compact mirror in his right hand, the mirror Remus had given him in September, with the instruction to keep it on his person until further notice. He spoke to the stone, very quietly, in the language that came through him from somewhere older than himself. He said, "I know you're there. I know what you've been made to do. I know that what's been directing you isn't what you would have chosen. The thing directing you, the artifact, it's been removed. After this week, there will be nothing compelling you. I thought you should know that before it happened, rather than after." The corridor was silent. Then the stones vibrated with something that was not speech yet, a subvocal register, the sound of something very large deciding whether to respond. It resolved, slowly, into words. The dialect was so archaic that Harry caught approximately 60%, the rest reconstructible from context. The last one who spoke this language to me was 400 years ago. He wanted something. I don't want anything. I came to tell you something. There's a difference, Harry said. What are you? Harry considered this question with the honesty it deserved. I'm a sentinel. I protect things, he said. The sentinels are gone. I know. Remus told me. He said the last one was 400 years ago. He said it like it was something that should have continued and didn't. The vibration in the stones changed quality. Not warmer, nothing about a 900-year-old basilisk was warm, but different. The quality of something that has been in a very long conversation with itself and has just heard an external voice use a word it had stopped expecting to hear. The sentinel served the living magic, not any one master. Yes, that's what I was taught, Harry said. I will wait. If what you say is true, if the compulsion ends, I will wait. Thank you, Harry said. He stood. He put the mirror in his pocket. He walked back to the common room and wrote in his observation log, contact established. Compliance voluntary. Awaiting Remus. He paused. He wrote one more line, Remus said, not a creature. A consciousness. He was right. He went back the following morning. He proposed it carefully, in the archaic dialect, one phrase at a time, mutual sentinel service. She would guard the lower levels. He would provide the communication link, the first voice she had heard in 4 centuries that spoke her language without wanting something from her. The corridor was quiet for a long time. Then, the sentinel serves the living magic. I will hold the lower ways. Harry translated this for Remus's letter that evening. He added one line of his own. She said yes freely. I want that noted. Thursday morning. The front gates of Hogwarts opened before Remus reached them. He reached the second-floor corridor where Harry and Hermione were already waiting with their mirrors and their survey and 2 months of documentation. You talked to her, Remus said. Yes, Harry said. Tell me, Remus said. Harry told him everything. The detection, the network, the movement map, Ginny, the diary, the conversation in the corridor. Remus listened without interrupting. When Harry finished, he looked at the stone floor of the corridor for a moment. Her name? He said. I was going to ask you, Harry said. Remus thought about it. Merwin. It's Old Welsh, he said. It means Great One, Hermione said. She had a Welsh dictionary in her bag. He looked at the wall behind which something very ancient was waiting. He turned to Harry. Please tell her, we are here. The compulsion ends today. You have my word. And tell her, we'd like to ask something of her. Freely, not under compulsion. We are fighting something made from death magic, the same kind that imprisoned her. The man who created it made objects that hold pieces of his soul. They can only be dissolved by the venom of the king serpent. She would be helping to end what bound her. Harry turned toward the wall and spoke in the language that came through him from somewhere older than himself. The corridor vibrated. The silence was long. Then, the stones shifted, and a small hollow opened at the base of the wall, and something ancient and acrid and perfectly lethal gleamed in the cavity. Freely given, Marwyn's voice came through the stone. The living magic remembers what the sentinel's service costs. Harry's voice was steady when he translated this. His eyes were not entirely. Remus crouched and carefully, with the tools he had brought for precisely this eventuality, extracted the venom. The sword of Gryffindor, retrieved from Dumbledore's office that morning, was treated with that venom under the precision of a man who understood what he was doing and why. The sword, which took into itself only that which made it stronger, accepted it fully. When it was done, he stood. Tell her thank you, he said quietly, to Harry. Harry told her. The vibration that came back through the stones was not words. It was the quality of something settling into the long patience it had always had, but now without the weight of compulsion pressing down on top of it. Dumbledore, standing at the corridor's end, had not drawn his wand. I've been headmaster of this school for 30 years, he said. He did not finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Harry found the note in Remus's private library at number 5 during the Christmas holidays. Not hidden, exactly, but filed in the back section of the 1981 folder behind the ward construction records, which was either an oversight or a deliberate placement that counted on Harry not going through the 1981 folder because the 1981 folder was the one Harry had never been invited to read. He had gone in looking for the original Sentinel Ward diagrams. He found those on page 3. On page 17, between 2 ward maintenance logs, he found a single sheet of parchment in Remus's handwriting. Sirius arrested. No trial. Azkaban, confirmed via ministry bulletin. Pettigrew, body? No body confirmed in official record. Blast radius inconsistent with single curse event. Evidence pattern, insufficient for confidence and standard narrative. Follow-up? The note had been made and never updated. Harry understood why. Remus had been covert since the beginning. Every ministry contact was a risk. Every inquiry about Sirius Black was a risk. He had made the note, and then he had made the calculation, and the calculation had said, "Not yet. Not until it's safe. Not until I have standing to push." He put it back where he found it, exactly as he had found it, and went downstairs to help Hermione with the ward theory problem she had been working on since breakfast. He did not say anything about it yet. He was learning, had been learning, slowly, from a man who was very patient about the lesson. The difference between having information and knowing when to use it. The Marauders map showed Peter Pettigrew on a Wednesday evening in March. Harry was in the dormitory with the map open on his bed, conducting the nightly location check that had become habit since September. In the Gryffindor dormitory, in the area of the room corresponding to Ron Weasley's bed, the map showed 2 names, Ronald Weasley, and, overlapping it so completely that the letters bled into each other, Peter Pettigrew. He looked at it for a long time. He got Hermione. She stood at the foot of Harry's bed and looked at the map. "Peter Pettigrew is dead," she said. "The map shows every living person in the castle." "It doesn't show dead people," Harry said. He had found the maker's notes in the map's border text, microscopic annotations and 4 different handwritings explaining the map's own mechanics, which was the kind of thing you found when you looked at something very carefully for a long time. "Then Peter Pettigrew isn't dead," Hermione said. She sat down on the edge of the bed. She looked at the overlapping names. He could see the moment she arrived at the same place he had arrived at approximately 40 minutes earlier. The place where the implications resolved into a complete picture with a specific shape, and that shape had a specific name. "Ron's rat," she said. "Scabbers." "How old?" Hermione opened the survey to the page on Animagi. Standard rat lifespan, 2 to 4 years. Ron's had him since he started Hogwarts. Percy had him before that. "The Weasleys have had this rat for over a decade," she said. Peter Pettigrew was confirmed unregistered animagus by Sirius Black's testimony at his arrest. The testimony was dismissed without investigation because there was no trial. Rat form. "Missing a toe," Harry said. Hermione was very still for a moment. "Ron's rat is missing a toe on the right front paw," she said. The dormitory was quiet. Outside the window, the spring night was clear and cold. "We need the rat," Harry said. He spoke to Ron the following morning. "Ron, I need to tell you something about Scabbers that's going to be difficult to hear. I need you to hear all of it before you respond. And I need you to know that I wouldn't be saying it if I wasn't certain," Harry said. Ron had known Harry long enough to understand that certain was not a casual word. "All right," he said. Harry told him, clearly, sequentially, without softening the parts that needed to be said directly. The map, the enchantment's mechanics, the animagus registry, the unregistered rat form, the missing toe, the decade-long lifespan that should have been impossible. Ron was quiet for a long time. "You're saying my rat is Peter Pettigrew," he said. I'm saying the evidence is consistent with that conclusion, and I think we need to perform an animagus reveal charm to confirm it. If it's true, then a man named Sirius Black has been in Azkaban for 12 years for a crime he didn't commit. And the person who actually committed it has been in your pocket, Harry said. All right, do the charm, Ron said. The charm was performed in an empty classroom on a Sunday afternoon. Hermione had found it in a restricted text through Madame Pince, whom she had approached with a reading request so precisely reasoned that Pince had issued a provisional restricted access pass on the grounds that Hermione had demonstrated she understood what she was asking for, which was Pince's personal standard. Ron held Scabbers, who was being more than usually difficult, straining toward the window with an urgency that was, in retrospect, entirely explicable. Harry cast the charm. The rat became a man, short, balding, with small, watery eyes and the specific physical quality of someone who has spent over a decade being very small and hoping not to be noticed. His right hand was missing its index finger at the first joint. Hermione, get parchment, Harry said. He said it to the room and not to Pettigrew, because Pettigrew was not the priority. The documentation was the priority, because records were the only thing that could not be argued with after the fact. Harry used a binding jinx from Remus's private curriculum, one of the Black family's practical restraint enchantments. Pettigrew went still. Ron sat down on the floor with the specific heaviness of someone who has just had their understanding of the past decade reorganized. Harry sat beside him. He did not say anything. He sat there, because sitting there was what was needed. After a moment, Ron said, 12 years. Yes, Harry said. He's been in my pocket for 12 years. Yes, Sirius Black is innocent, Ron said. Yes, we're going to prove it, Harry said. The evidence report went to the Hogwarts Board of Governors, the body with direct jurisdiction over school security matters and the authority to compel ministry response. The board forwarded it immediately to the Demil with a formal demand for review. Clearwater, Remus's solicitor, Sirius's solicitor by extension, retained through the Potter Black Trust since the beginning for precisely this possibility, filed a response to the ministry within the week. It was 1 page. The final paragraph read, "The ministry has in its custody a living man whose presence conclusively demonstrates that the crime for which Sirius Black was imprisoned was committed by another individual. The ministry will proceed to trial within 60 days, or the Department of Magical Law Enforcement's conduct in the original 1981 arrest will be reviewed by the Wizengamot's Oversight Committee under the Judicial Accountability Statute of 1793. The trial date was set within the week. The Wizengamot chamber was full in the way it was only full when something significant was being decided. Harry sat in the witness section with the Potter Lordship documentation Clearwater had prepared. He was 13 years old. Sirius Black was thin in the way of something that has been cold for a very long time. But his eyes were James's eyes, and when he looked at Harry they did something that photographs had no mechanism for. The trial lasted 4 hours. Pettigrew under Veritaserum confirmed everything. Remus testified. Harry presented the documentary evidence, the map, the animagus reveal result, 12 years of Remus's observation notes. Cornelius Fudge said at one point that the memory of a 13-year-old might not be fully reliable. Harry waited for him to finish. Minister, the documentation I've presented was compiled by a qualified professional over 12 years and verified against ministry records by Gringotts' legal team. My memory isn't the evidence. The evidence is the evidence, he said. Remus set the observation log on the evidence table without being asked. 12 years. Daily entries. The cross-referencing that showed Pettigrew's presence was deductively certain from the moment the map was acquired. This is the memory of a 13-year-old, Remus said to the chamber, indicating Harry. This, he indicated the log, is 12 years of documented professional observation, notarized annually by Gringotts' legal team. He sat down. He folded his hands. The vote: 43 for innocent, 5 for guilty. 2 abstentions. Sirius Black was free. The private room off the main chamber. After, Sirius was alone when Harry found him, sitting in a chair by the window with his hands in his lap, looking at them with the expression of a man learning to believe something that has been denied for so long that belief itself requires practice. "Lily's eyes," Sirius said. "Everyone says that," Harry said. Something moved in Sirius's expression. "I imagine they do," he said. "Remus told me what he did. For you. He said it was nothing." "He said it was nothing," Sirius agreed. "He also cried when he told me. On the telephone. Don't tell him I told you that. He can hear at distances you wouldn't believe. He's probably already heard," Harry said. From the corridor outside the room, where Remus was standing in the precise way of a man who has been standing in corridors waiting for the right moment to enter for a very long time, came a sound that was very deliberately not a response. Sirius Black, for the first time in 12 years, laughed. It was not the laugh of a man who was completely well. It was the laugh of a man who was beginning to remember what laughing was. Harry looked at him and thought, this is what the pack was always supposed to be. The 4th point, the one that had been missing. Remus waited 12 years for this room. We got here. That was enough. That night, at Grimmauld Place, Remus made tea. Nobody talked about 12 years directly. Sirius told a story about the Marauders. The night James transfigured Filch's entire filing cabinet into a flock of geese, which then had to be individually caught and retransfigured before Filch returned from his rounds. It was not a remarkable story. They laughed at it for 6 minutes. Harry kept the sound of that laughter in the same place he kept the memory of his mother's voice. Somewhere it could not be reached by the things that tried. The Gringotts' account chamber smelled of cold metal and old parchment. Harry signed the formal documentation of House Potter's Wizengamot, standing with the same deliberate care he gave anything that required it. The goblin pressed the inheritance seal. The wax caught the light. Harry looked at the Potter family ring. He picked it up. It was heavier than he had expected. He put it on. The ring resized, instantly, completely, with the specific warmth of magic recognizing a rightful claim. Remus said nothing. He looked at the ring on Harry's hand with the expression of someone watching a thing arrive that has been in transit for a very long time. "It suits you." "James would be insufferably smug about this," Sirius said. Hermione, at the end of the table with her documentation, said, "The Meritocracy Act petition." "Can we discuss the petition?" The magical Meritocracy Act of 1643 had not been invoked since 1847. Hermione had found it while looking for a legal mechanism that addressed the gap between what she was and what the system's architecture acknowledged. Muggle-born witches and wizards had no houses. No houses meant no Wizengamot standing. She was 13 years old and she found the gap in the law, and she filled it. The petition was 23 pages and cited 47 precedents. Ironforge the Goblin reviewed it for 40 minutes. The magical output standard required under the Act is currently defined at Newt-level proficiency in a minimum of 3 disciplines, he said. I have McGonagall's written assessment. Flitwick's supplementary note. Snape's marking record for the past 2 years, Hermione said. She produced each document. I'm operating at Newt level in 6 subjects. I'm 13. Ironforge looked at the documents. He looked at Hermione. House Granger will be registered pending the standard 30-day verification period, he said. Thank you, Hermione said. The sigil she had chosen, a phoenix ascending from an open book, was noted in silver ink. She looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned to the next page of her notes, because the sigil was decided, and the next item required her attention. Dolores Umbridge had been on Hermione's radar since she found a Ministry Gazette containing the Muggle-born registration amendment. 3 additional documentation requirements, each individually defensible, each in aggregate adding burden exclusively to Muggle-born registration. The burden was the point. The bureaucratic language was the mechanism. She opened a new section in Volume 3 of the survey, Ministry of Magic, Discriminatory Legislative Pattern Analysis. Primary subject, Umbridge, D. By year 3 she had 7 entries, each one individually defensible, together forming something that had a shape and a direction and a clear endpoint. Sirius read the complete file in 2 hours. The werewolf employment restriction, he said. I'm aware of it, Remus said from the kitchen where he was making tea. It's why you can't. I'm aware of it, Sirius. A silence. Then Sirius said, to Harry and Hermione, what do you need from me? Your Wizengamot seat. Your vote on the follow-up motion matters, Harry said. You have it. Obviously, I also need access to the Wizengamot's administrative records for the past 4 years. Sirius can request those as a member, Hermione said. Done. Thank you, Hermione said. She turned to the next item on her list. Harry filed the formal objection to Umbridge's proposed Hogwarts appointment 7 days before the board session. 7 pages, footnoted, organized under 4 specific grounds of objection covering the Charter of Rights of Magical Education, documented pattern of discriminatory administrative conduct, conflict of interest, and absence of any qualification in magical pedagogy. The board session came on a Tuesday morning. Umbridge arrived in pink, with her clipboard and her smile. The board chair read the formal objection aloud. It took 11 minutes. Umbridge's smile did not move. Behind it, something was recalibrating, the stillness of a person who has encountered unexpected resistance and is mapping it while their face continues its scheduled programming. These concerns are, I'm sure, well-intentioned, she said. But a 13-year-old's interpretation of administrative law, from the observer's gallery, Sirius said, without raising his voice, the objection cites 47 precedents. We've arranged for independent legal verification from 3 barristers if the board would prefer a delay for confirmation. We'll proceed to vote, the board chair said. The vote was 7-5 against her appointment. Umbridge collected her clipboard. She walked toward the door with the controlled movement of a woman who does not allow rooms to see what they have cost her. She passed Remus in the corridor, sitting throughout the session, hands folded, present as a witness rather than a participant. She recognized him. The recognition was visible in the specific quality of attention she gave him, the assessment of a woman who had authored the werewolf employment restriction and was now looking at one of its subjects. She opened her mouth. Good afternoon, Madam Umbridge. Lovely day, Remus said. He held her gaze for the precise duration required. Then he stood, buttoned his coat, and followed Harry and Hermione out. Hermione had known about the provision since the summer before Year 4. She produced a copy of the last official Triwizard Tournament charter, dated 1792, the final recorded version before the tournament's suspension, preserved in the Black family archive, and opened it to page 14. The provision read, in her margin translation, in cases where a school's champion is identified jointly, the goblet shall receive such submission as a school's entry, and shall select accordingly, provided the submission explicitly cites this provision. This provision has never been invoked. The last time paired submission was considered was 1842, and the school decided against it for reasons the records describe only as practical concerns, Hermione said. We don't have that problem, Harry said. No, he unfolded a letter from Remus, dated from July. The provision is real and legally intact. Clearwater confirmed it. The goblet predates the age restriction by several centuries, and its mandate supersedes it for house submissions. This is both the most and least surprising letter I have ever received from either of you, and I want it noted that I said so before you succeeded. We're entering, Harry said. Yes, I've drafted the entry form, Hermione said. She produced it from her bag. It was already drafted. Of course it was. Sirius submitted the form on the last night of the submission period, 20 minutes before the flame was due to be extinguished. He walked to the goblet in the entrance hall with the form in his hand and the quality of ease that he was gradually recovering. The goblet's flame accepted the parchment. It burned for 6 seconds, longer than any previous entry, and changed color during those 6 seconds in a sequence that Hermione later documented as consistent with the goblet processing a categorical distinction it had not previously been asked to make. Not rejection. Recalibration. Sirius passed Dumbledore on the way back. "Evening, Albus," Sirius said. "Sirius," Dumbledore said. A pause. The 1792 provision. Hermione found it in June. "Of course she did," Dumbledore said. "Halloween, the Great Hall. Candles and pumpkins and 2 months of anticipation." Dumbledore called the champions Cedric Diggory, Fleur Delacour, Victor Krum. Then he reached into the goblet for the 4th name, and his hand stilled for a moment, the pause of a man who has been expecting something and is verifying that the verification matches the expectation. He read the first slip, Harry Potter. He read the second slip, Hermione Granger. He said, Hogwarts. The Great Hall produced a sound that was not quite applause and not quite confusion and not quite anything that had a standard name, because the situation producing it did not have a standard name either. Olympe Maxime's expression was the expression of a woman encountering a procedural development she had not anticipated and was assessing it for challengeability. Igor Karkaroff's was similar, but with an additional quality of personal affront. Several ministry officials were consulting each other in the urgent way of people discovering that a situation has more dimensions than their briefing materials indicated. The Triwizard Tournament, in its original charter, provides for joint submission under specific conditions. Those conditions have been met. Both submissions are valid, Dumbledore said. He looked at the room with the calm authority of a man who is not asking for agreement, simply providing information. We have 4 champions. The ministry official responsible for tournament oversight stood up and said that this was irregular, and that the regulations, from the guest seats, Sirius said. The relevant provision is on page 14 of the 1792 charter. Clearwater can provide certified copies if the ministry requires them. He anticipated this. He said anticipated with the specific quality of someone who is prepared for the objections sufficiently far in advance that the preparation itself is a form of confidence. The ministry official sat down. Bartemius Crouch Jr. had been on Harry's observation log since the 3rd week of term, not as a confirmed identification, as an anomaly. The man presenting himself as Alistair Moody moved through the castle with a magical signature that flickered in a way that Harry's ambient awareness registered as inconsistent. Standard human magical signatures were stable. Moody's had 2 qualities. The primary one presented as the surface, powerful, experienced, with the specific texture of a magical core that had spent decades in combat-adjacent work. The secondary one appeared in the gaps, shorter intervals, different frequency, the sense of something generating at a different rate beneath the dominant signal. By November he had 6 weeks of observation data. Hermione had been conducting her own analysis in parallel, speech pattern analysis, comparing Moody's conversational style against archived newspaper interviews and ministry hearing records from the past 20 years. The passive voice construction frequency is wrong. The real Moody uses it in approximately 30% of recorded speech. This man uses it in approximately 8%. That's not normal variation. That's a different speaker, Hermione said. Polyjuice, sustained, someone is living as Moody, Harry said. They brought it to Dumbledore. 12 pages. The observation log, the speech pattern analysis, 3 candidate identities ranked by likelihood. The ranked first candidate was Bartemius Crouch Jr., presumed dead. You reached the same conclusion through a completely different methodological approach and arrived at a more specific candidate identification than I had, Dumbledore said. Your concerns are in the document. Footnote 7. We incorporated them, Hermione said. You incorporated my private concerns. You mentioned them to McGonagall in the staff room." "The door was open," Harry said. "The trunk. If Crouch is using Polyjuice, his office. We mapped the ward signature on his office door in week 3. Concealment ward of unusual depth," Hermione said. "I'll handle it tonight," Dumbledore said. He did. The real Moody was in the trunk. Crouch Jr. found and administered Veritaserum, confirmed everything. The mechanism to deliver Harry to Voldemort had been identified and removed before it could be used. The third task was a standard maze competition. No enchanted cup. No portkey. No graveyard. Harry and Hermione entered together, moved through the maze with the map running continuously, and navigated the obstacles with the specific economy of people for whom obstacle navigation was simply a category of problem, and problems had methods. They reached the genuine Triwizard Cup at the same moment, which was both the most and least surprising outcome of the evening. The scoring placed them joint first on points across all 3 tasks. The prize money was allocated to 2 recipients, the Hogwarts Library's Archive Fund and the newly established Creature Rights Legal Foundation that Sirius had incorporated the previous November, named by Hermione, funded by Sirius, with Remus's name on the founding documentation as expert consultant. The tactical board went up in the summer between Year 4 and Year 5. Red threads and pins for confirmed Death Eater contacts. Blue threads for Horcrux research, Hermione's territory, cross-referenced against every historical document she could access through Dumbledore's library, the Black Family Archive, years of careful restricted section work at Hogwarts. Green for confirmed clear locations, black for unknown. Voldemort had returned through a ritual in the summer. Not through the tournament. That mechanism had been identified and removed. He had used a different approach, the contingency plan of a man who had been building contingencies since 1970. He was back, corporeal. He was also missing something he did not yet know was gone. The Riddle Diary had been destroyed. Remus had managed that with contained precision in a warded room at Grimmauld Place over 4 hours. The observation log entry read, "Diary destroyed." Soul fragment confirmed dissolved. Harry confirmed unharmed. Hermione confirmed unharmed. I need to sit down. The Horcrux framework had been Hermione's project since that night. By Year 5, she had a candidate list of 6 objects. 5 remained. She presented the list to Dumbledore in a document that was 40 pages. "I've been developing a similar framework," Dumbledore said. "I know." "You're cited in the footnotes," Hermione said. "You cited me." "Appropriately, attribution matters." "She says that to everyone," Harry said from across the table. "The candidate ranking is different from mine in 3 places. Walk me through your reasoning on the locket," Dumbledore said. She walked him through it. "Your reasoning is sounder than mine on 2 of the 3. The third I'll maintain my position on and document the disagreement," he said. "That's fair. I've noted your position in the appendix," Hermione said. The Horcrux campaign ran through Year 5, Year 6, and the first half of Year 7. It was methodical in the way that everything they did was methodical, not because excitement was absent, but because they had been taught that methodology was how you prevented excitement from becoming error. Harry's Parseltongue was the primary detection instrument. His sensitivity to Horcrux anchored soul fragments developed since his first conversation with Merwin in that second-floor corridor. Hermione's theoretical framework identified candidates. Harry confirmed or eliminated them. The ring in the Gaunt Shack required 3 days of preparation and a destruction method that Remus developed from the Black family's Grey Magic archive. The cup in the Lestrange vault required a Gringotts forensic operation. The diadem required 6 weeks of research and a discovery Hermione made at 2 in the morning, with Harry sitting next to her saying nothing while she worked through the final piece of it. Each destruction was documented. Each one changed the board. The blue threads reduced. The confirmed clear section grew. Dumbledore's hand was injured in the ring operation, taking a curse that Remus intercepted partially, landing on the wand hand rather than the chest, because Remus had cast a deflection that moved the impact point by 18 inches. That was a killing curse variant, Dumbledore said. Afterward, yes. The deflection moved the anchor point, Remus said. You were fast. I've been running perimeters for 15 years. Fast is a habit, Remus said. Voldemort moved on Hogwarts in the spring of Year 7. He moved because the Horcrux losses had produced in his strategic calculation a growing urgency, a sense that something was working against him in ways his intelligence network could not fully identify. He did not know about the board at number 5. He did not know about the survey volumes, now at 12 and counting. He knew only that waiting had begun to feel like losing. The Order had known the attack was coming since February, when Snape provided the strategic timeline with the specific quality of information that costs the provider something real to give. The tactical board had been updated for the Hogwarts scenario since autumn. Every approach route, every ward layer, every position that needed to be held and by whom. Over 40 trained Sentinel students had their positions assigned. Neville Longbottom was in the corridor outside the room of requirement. This was not coincidental. Hermione's fifth-year assessment had read, Longbottom demonstrates exceptional magical commitment under high-stress conditions. His most powerful casting correlates specifically with defensive intent toward others. Recommend, position requiring precisely this profile. The Sword of Gryffindor was in the headmaster's office. Neville knew where it was. He knew what had been done to it in a second-floor corridor 3 years ago, and he knew what it was for. Voldemort found Harry in the Great Hall as the dawn of the battle's second phase was beginning to gray the windows. He looked at Harry and saw the orphan. The boy. Exactly what he had always expected to see. Harry looked at him and saw Tom Riddle. The specific, documented, cross-referenced, analyzed Tom Riddle of 12 survey volumes and 7 years of preparation. The man who had been brilliant and had spent the brilliance on being afraid. Tom, Harry said. The word landed in the Great Hall with the precision of something aimed rather than merely spoken. Not contempt. Not bravado. The specific act of naming, the Sentinel's act, the act that said, I see you as you are, not as you present yourself. Voldemort's response was the Cruciatus. It arrived before Harry had finished the breath he was taking, because Voldemort was genuinely fast and had spent 50 years refining fast into something most wizards could not track. Harry moved left, not dodged, moved, the trained response of a body that had been practicing this specific kind of movement since age 7 in a back garden in Surrey, and the curse caught the edge of his right shoulder rather than his center. The pain was specific and total. He processed it the way Remus had taught him to process pain as information. Current status, immediate threat, available response. He did not go down. He extended the Marauder Awareness Protocol to its full range. The Great Hall came into complete focus. Not visual focus, but the deeper focus of complete ambient awareness. Every magical signature in the room, every emotional register, every position. He mapped Voldemort's casting pattern in the first 30 seconds, the 2-second telegraph and the wand's micro-movement before each major spell. The weight shift that preceded the killing curse variant, the angle of the shoulder that indicated a feint. He communicated this to Hermione through the non-verbal signal system they had been refining since they were 8 years old, the compression of years of shared language into a gesture, a quality of stillness that said everything necessary in the time available. Hermione received it. She adjusted her position and cast a shield variant from the Midnight Academy curriculum, not a flat surface but a responsive one, shifting to meet the precise angle of incoming spell work. It moved like a living thing because it was built on the Wolf Doctrine principle that defensive magic operated best when it knew what it was defending. Voldemort redirected at her. Harry moved forward. He spoke in Parseltongue, not to Voldemort, to Nagini. He spoke carefully, in the archaic dialect he had been practicing since his first conversation in a second-floor corridor 5 years ago, He said, "You were a living creature before he made you what you are. The living part of you, whatever remains of it, knows that what was placed inside you is not you. I'm asking the living part to step back." Nagini was still. Voldemort turned. The turn was a mistake. The fraction of attention redirected from Harry to the snake was a fraction that the tactical plan had been built around, the gap that Neville Longbottom's position had been calculated to use. Neville moved from the corridor entrance. He had the sword of Gryffindor, treated with the venom that Merwin had given freely 3 years ago. In a second-floor corridor, because a 900-year-old consciousness had decided that one sentinel's word was worth trusting. The sword had accepted the venom the way it accepted everything that made it stronger, fully, permanently, without reservation. He brought it down. Nagini's body went still. The Horcrux dissolved. Harry felt it the way he felt all of them. The specific release of a dark anchor losing its hold. The cold presence becoming absence. The seventh fragment, the one that had resided in Harry's scar since infancy, had been addressed in Year 6 through a method Remus had found in the Black family archive. A procedure that had required 3 hours at Grimmauld Place and had left everyone who had been in the room sitting on the floor in silence for a long time afterward. Voldemort was mortal. The knowledge of it arrived in him at the same moment it arrived in Harry, the moment Nagini went still. Something moved in the red eyes. Not fear, because Voldemort had spent 50 years re-engineering his relationship with fear into something he did not acknowledge. The thing that moved was its predecessor. The recognition that the architecture of his survival had been systematically, methodically, patiently dismantled by people who had started the work before he even knew they existed. Harry raised his wand. He used the soul fracture method. Not a curse, a specific application from the Black Family Archives section on soul anchoring and counter theory. Not violent. The opposite of violent. The specific, precise application of force at exactly the right point. The way a single note can shatter glass if it finds the glass's resonant frequency. Tom Riddle had been fragmenting his soul since 1943. The fault lines were extensive. Harry found them. He applied the pressure. He held it for the 30 seconds the method required, which were the longest 30 seconds he had experienced since that night at Grimmauld Place. Then it was done. Tom Riddle came apart at the fault lines he had made himself. Not dramatically, not in fire or light or sound. He simply became what he had always fundamentally been. A man who had cut away every piece of himself that could feel loss, and had therefore lost everything, and was now left with the remainder, which was not enough to constitute a person. He fell. The Great Hall was very quiet. "Clean," Hermione said from across the room, in the flat, precise voice she used when she was stating a conclusion she had verified. "Remus will be pleased," Harry said. He said it the way he said things that mattered without wanting them to be dramatic. Simply, directly, to the person next to him, in the voice of someone who has been trained since childhood to say the true thing rather than the performing thing. Outside, through the Great Hall's damaged windows, dawn was arriving in the specific way of dawn after long nights. Not triumphant. Not announcing itself, simply present. The light that comes because it always comes, regardless of what the night contained. Harry sat down on the floor of the Great Hall. Hermione sat beside him. The specific proximity of the pack, close enough to communicate presence, far enough to give him the space that was also needed. They sat there while the order moved through the hall around them, while the battle's aftermath organized itself into the work of what comes after. Harry looked at the windows. He thought about a back garden in winter with his breath steaming. He thought about a blindfold and 12 objects in the dark. He thought about a candle that had doubled its flame for a girl sitting next to him. He thought, Remus is at the gate. He stood. He went to find him. The Wizengamot chamber on a Tuesday morning, 6 months after the fall of Voldemort. Every seat was occupied. This was unusual, full attendance at standard sessions, was a procedural achievement that the Chamber's administrative staff spent considerable effort pursuing and rarely achieved. Today, no pursuit had been necessary. The Chamber had filled itself, which was what chambers did when the thing being decided was significant enough that absence felt like a position. Harry stood at the podium in formal robes with the Potter ring on his hand and the House Granger Foundation's legal brief in front of him, and he looked at the chamber the way Remus had taught him to look at rooms that required accurate assessment rather than performance, completely, without the social architecture of either deference or challenge. The man who protected me for 14 years, who turned a suburban street into the most defended civilian location in Britain, who taught me everything I know about magic and strategy and how to be a person worth being, is a werewolf. He has been legally classified as a dangerous being rather than a dangerous person for the entirety of his adult life. If anyone in this chamber wishes to argue that Remus John Lupin does not deserve the rights of a British citizen, I invite them to make that argument to his face, he said. He stepped away from the podium. He looked at the observers' gallery. The Charter of Magical Beings was 47 pages. Hermione had drafted it over the course of Year 7 and 2 summers, working in the specific way she worked on things that mattered, without the artificial boundary between hours that were for working and hours that were for other things. 17 versions. Harry had read every version and provided comments on 14 of them. Sirius had provided legal context on the Wizengamot procedural sections. Remus had reviewed the werewolf's specific provisions with the specific attention of a man who understood the gap between what a law said and what it did to the people it described. He had made 12 comments. Each one was precise. One of them, on the provision establishing the right of werewolves to hold ministry positions without disclosure of their condition. Read. The disclosure question is more complex than this draft acknowledges. Some werewolves will want to disclose, some will not. The right is not the right to hide, it is the right to choose. This distinction needs to be explicit in the language. Hermione had revised the provision 3 times before the language satisfied him. The Charter extended full citizenship rights to werewolves, centaurs, merpeople, house elves, and goblins. Not identical provisions, they were not identical communities, but equivalent standing. The right to own property. The right to bring legal claims. The right to not be registered as a dangerous entity by default. The right, in each case, to be a person under the law rather than a category. The debate ran for 4 hours. Several members of the Old Guard spoke against it. They used the familiar architecture of their objections: tradition, precedent, public safety, complexity of implementation, with the fluency of people who had been speaking these words for decades and had confused their fluency with their validity. They were not, most of them, monstrous. They were people whose moral framework had been formed in a specific world and who were being asked to update the framework without being given adequate time to understand why the world had changed. Harry waited for them to finish. This was the discipline Remus had drilled into him since he was 6. The wolf patience of a creature that does not move until the moment requires movement. He had been practicing it in political rooms for 3 years. He was very good at it now. When the last objection had been made, he stood and said what he said about Remus. Then he stepped aside. Remus stood in the observer's gallery. He had been sitting in the same seat since 9 o'clock, hands folded in his lap, with the straight-backed stillness that had been his physical grammar since the November night he first stepped onto the front step of number 5, Privet Drive. He was 43 years old. The gray at his temples had completed its work years ago, and his hair was fully silver now, which suited him in the way that things suit people who have stopped apologizing for what they are. He stood. The chamber's attention moved to him, not dramatically, not all at once, but with the gradual quality of rooms becoming aware of something they had not been fully attending to. The members who had met him in formal contexts over the past 3 years, at Board of Governors sessions, at DM lay briefings, At the Wizengamot procedural hearings where he had appeared as Harry's registered guardian and primary advisor, straightened slightly in their seats. The members who had only read about him in documentation straightened for different reasons. He walked from the observer's gallery to the podium. He did not walk quickly. He did not look for permission. He stood at the podium and said, "I have been a registered werewolf since I was informed of my status at age 14. In the 30 years since, I have completed my Hogwarts education at the top of my year, been employed by the Order of the Phoenix, served as the primary caregiver and educator of two of the most effective individuals of their generation, maintained a civilian protection operation at the highest standard for 14 consecutive years, and contributed to the intelligence and tactical planning that ended the threat of Lord Voldemort," he said. He paused. "I did these things while being legally categorized as a dangerous being rather than a dangerous person." He looked at the chamber. Not at Harry, not at Sirius, not at Hermione. At the chamber itself, the room and its occupants, the institution with its centuries of accumulated authority and its accumulated failures. A dangerous being has restrictions placed on its movement, its employment, its property ownership, its legal standing. A dangerous person has rights. The distinction is not a question of public safety. It is a question of what we have decided, as a community, to see when we look at someone like me. I am asking you to see differently." He stepped back from the podium. He walked back to the observer's gallery and sat down and folded his hands in his lap. The chamber was quiet for a moment that had a specific quality, not the quiet before noise, but the quiet of a space in which something has just been said that cannot be unsaid. "The vote," Kingsley Shacklebolt said, from the minister's chair. 31 for. 14 against. The Charter of Magical Beings passed. In the observer's gallery, Harry sat to the left of Remus and Hermione to the right, which was exactly the geometry of the pack. The formation they had been building toward since an autumn morning when a single candle had doubled its flame in a book-smelling room on Privet Drive. Remus did not say anything immediately. He looked at the chamber, at the recorded vote, at the members beginning to rise, at Kingsley signing the formal record, and his hands remained folded in his lap, with the stillness that had carried him through 14 years of perimeter checks and training sessions in cold back gardens and long nights that cost him something real, and the fall of Voldemort and everything that came after. Then he said, very quietly, to the two people sitting beside him, "That'll do." It was 3 words. It contained everything. Harry looked at him. He looked at Hermione. She looked back with the specific expression she wore when a conclusion had been formally verified. The expression that meant, exactly right, exactly as it should be, nothing to add. Outside the Wizengamot chamber, through windows that looked out over the grey London morning, the city went about its ordinary business. Buses, rain beginning to come in. Someone on the street below looking up at the sky with the particular expression of a person caught without an umbrella who has decided to simply accept it. The world was not fixed. It would not be fixed in their lifetimes. But it was measurably, documentably, carefully different from what it had been on a November night in 1981, when a 21-year-old man in a good charcoal coat had stood on the front step of number 5, Privet Drive, and looked across the road at a house where a boy was sleeping, and had decided, in the full private knowledge of what it would cost him, to hold his post. The pack held. The work, in all its forms, had only just begun. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.